Hi everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So my name is Soraia, and if you have clicked on this video, thank you so much. I just want to start off by saying that firstly, it is a nice sunny day on the day that I'm filming this, so there might be some background noise because obviously people are out in their gardens doing things because it's a nice sunny day. So I'm really sorry if you hear any background noise. That is the reason why. So a few years ago on my YouTube channel, and I'm talking years ago, I started doing a series about diabetes. So I have type 1 diabetes, and I really like to kind of try and raise awareness about diabetes as much as I can, and I think it's really important that a lot of people know what type 1 diabetes is. And there are different types of diabetes, but I want to refilm that series in a more kind of chronological order. So that is what this series is going to be. I'm going to be filming different sections about diabetes related videos, and hopefully it kind of helps you. Hopefully it gives more of an insight as to what diabetes is, and hopefully if you've got any questions I can answer them. I am by no means an expert in diabetes, but obviously I've lived with it for 19 years now, and more recently I have become a pediatric diabetes nurse specialist. So I'm learning to grow, I'm growing to learn. I'm learning more and more about diabetes as the time goes on. So today is going to cover the symptoms of diabetes and what to look out for, what glucose is and how it kind of works in your body, and why people get type 1 diabetes, and kind of covering how diabetes is treated. So those are going to be the sections, and hopefully this video isn't going to be really long. Type 1 diabetes is more commonly than not known for being diagnosed in children or younger people. However, type 1 diabetes can literally occur at any point of someone's life, so it doesn't tend to happen a lot. It's not as common to be diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in older generation, but it can happen. So it's really important to notice the symptoms, or the most common symptoms of type 1 diabetes, which are the 4 T's: thin, thirsty, tired, and toilet. So people with in the lead up to having type 1 diabetes diagnosis might lose a lot of weight. They might become very tired because their body is basically breaking down its own fat. So you become very tired and your blood sugars are constantly high. They might become very thirsty, so drinking lots and lots of water, which then results in frequent trips to the toilet. If you spot any of those symptoms in someone that you know, then it might be worth just ruling out if there is any underlying type 1 diabetes. Diabetes is diagnosed by getting a blood test. So a blood test will show you that your blood sugars are really high and way above average. So I believe that that is the only way to be able to get a diagnosis. And I remember that, you know, the days leading up to me being diagnosed, I had been quite unwell for a couple of weeks. I had lost an awful lot of weight. I can't remember if I had been sort of sick, but I was almost going into a coma. I was just unbelievably thin, really tired, very low in energy, had just started secondary school. I just wasn't myself. Mum had taken me to the GP the day before. I was then admitted to hospital and was diagnosed, and I was just not well at all. And the earlier that you can catch those symptoms and be admitted and be diagnosed, the better, because the longer that you leave it and the longer that you're unwell is when you start to develop the sort of ketones in your body. So yeah, I was obviously given a blood test when I went into A&E, and that's when it was diagnosed, and obviously my body was pumped back with loads of fluids and all of the good stuff that I had been kind of stripped away from during the time of being unwell. So when you get type 1 diabetes, your body basically can't use the glucose that we get from the foods that we eat. So most of the foods that have glucose are carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are broken down into glucose. That glucose is then used in your body for energy, and it's distributed in your bloodstream and in your cells, and yeah, used for energy. But when you have type 1 diabetes, that glucose does not get distributed into your blood cells. So we have an organ called a pancreas, which produces something called insulin, and the insulin is basically like a key. And when you eat and your body breaks down the glucose in your body, the insulin is meant to come along, open up a key into your bloodstream and let the glucose in and be used for energy. So in someone that doesn't have type 1 diabetes, your body will basically produce the insulin, and it will distribute the glucose to where it's needed in your body and allow it to use that energy, that source of energy. But with type 1, that doesn't happen. Your body doesn't produce that insulin, which means that all of that glucose gets stuck in your bloodstream, isn't able to be distributed into your cells and used for energy. And the only way for your body to get rid of that glucose that's stuck in your blood is by it being peed out, which is why when people are first admitted to hospital and diagnosed, or pre-diagnosis, you pee an awful lot, because that is how your body is trying to get rid of that glucose. Why does this happen? Why do some people get type 1 diabetes and others don't? There is no real reason as to why it happens. Basically, some people can get a cold or develop a certain illness or be unwell for a couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden your body, as it's trying to attack this virus or whatever it is, you know, whatever illness it has, it's trying to attack and get rid of that illness. Your body then gets a little bit, it kind of goes into overdrive, and it also starts to attack your insulin producing cells. And when it does that, you then start to develop the symptoms of diabetes, because as your body is attacking the insulin producing hormone, it starts to become really unwell and develop the symptoms of diabetes. So the losing weight because your body is breaking down its own fat, the feeling more tired, the thirst, and the frequent toilet trips. So it's called an autoimmune disease. So your body is basically attacked itself. Now, in the first couple of weeks after someone is diagnosed with diabetes, they're in what's called a honeymoon period, and that basically means that there will be a very small amount of insulin still being produced, but eventually that will mean that will go to like no insulin hormones being produced at all. So at the beginning of someone's diagnosis, their blood sugars might actually be, you know, within normal range, or they might find that they don't need a lot of insulin being injected because they're still in that honeymoon period. But eventually that the insulin will completely stop being produced, and obviously, you know, I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but that's when eventually the more management side of things will have to take over. There's a misconception that diabetes is genetic. However, that's not necessarily true. When I was diagnosed at the age of 11, there was nobody in my family with type 1 diabetes. However, if there are people in your family, your immediate family, that have an autoimmune disease, then you can be more likely to develop type 1 diabetes because it's an autoimmune condition. So autoimmune diseases and conditions can be genetic, but not necessarily type 1 diabetes. But it is known that, you know, brothers and sisters can both get type 1, mums and, you know, their children, or dads and their children can get type 1. But there's no kind of proven research out there that says if you've got type 1 diabetes that, you know, your family members are going to get it. But yeah, it can happen. So it's really important just to kind of know that if someone has got type 1 diabetes, it's no fault of their own. It's not because of something that they've done wrong. It's not because of something that they've eaten too much of. You know, type 2 diabetes is very much related with not a very good diet and maybe not enough exercise. However, type 1 and also type 2 it can be reversible. Some people take tablets for that and sometimes need a very short amount of insulin injections, but it is reversible, whereas type 1 diabetes is not. And at the moment, unfortunately, there's no cure for it, and it is just managed by counting the carbohydrates that you eat and balancing that with the amount of insulin that you give via injection, or now there's things called insulin pumps, but we'll kind of get into that further on in this series. Basically, when you don't have enough insulin being produced in your body, it's kind of like a car running out of fuel. Your blood sugars are running higher and higher, which means you get more and more tired because your glucose isn't being transferred into your blood cells. You're not being able to use that glucose for energy. It's not being distributed, so you get more and more tired. Your body starts to produce something called ketones, because basically it starts to break down your fat cells and your muscle cells, so you produce something called ketones. Now, for someone with type 1 diabetes, if too many ketones are produced in their body, this is like poison to the body. It's really, really dangerous, and we don't want a lot of ketones in the body at all. Further on in this series, I will obviously go into how we check if we have ketones in our body, when to check if we have ketones and things like that. But it's just very important to know that if someone with type 1 diabetes is running their blood sugars quite high very often, or they are unwell, it's really important to check for ketones. The word for having too many ketones in your body for someone with diabetes is called diabetic ketoacidosis. So you're basically high on glucose, your body is becoming acidic, you've got ketones, and that's what diabetic ketoacidosis is, or DKA for short. But basically the symptoms of this are you might struggle to breathe, you might have quite a fast heart rate, that some people describe a quite distinctive smell on someone's breath who has DKA, which is like a pear drop kind of smell. You might be very, very low on energy. DKA is really dangerous if left untreated, because it can lead to brain swelling and it can lead to someone passing away. So if diabetic ketoacidosis or ketones aren't sorted and treated quickly, it can lead to it's a medical emergency. The same with if your blood sugars are too low. So if they're too high, so above range, it's called a hyperglycemia. And a good way to remember that is like you give kids sweets, they become really hyperactive, they're high on sugar, so that's how it's easy to remember, a hyperglycemia. And the other side of that, when they're too low, is a hypoglycemia, or hypo for short. The only way, as I mentioned before, that we can treat diabetes is by injecting insulin or having an insulin pump. I've always been on injections, so it's called multiple daily injections. And when you're on injections, you have 2 different insulin pens. So you have one which is a quick acting insulin. This is the insulin that you give when you have something to eat, or if your blood sugars are running a little bit too high and you need to bring them down. So that's one. And then you also have a long acting insulin, which works in the background over a 24-hour period. And the idea is that this one just tries to keep you steady for 24 hours a day. And I personally give this one twice a day. So I do this one at 9 p.m. and 9 a.m. because this particular one that I'm on doesn't quite work over a 24-hour period. It's a little bit less than that. So by splitting the doses, it means that it will work over 24 hours. So I will go into the insulins a bit more and how to give them and things like that in another series. But obviously we use a little needle that we put on the end of the insulin pens, and it's a subcutaneous injection, which means you want it, you don't want it to go into the muscle, you want it to go into like the fatty tissue of either your leg, your bottom, the backs of your arms, or your stomach area. And obviously, to be able to know how much insulin to give, someone with type 1 diabetes has to check their blood sugars to know where they are. So a normal blood sugar range is between 4 and 7. Obviously with someone for someone with type 1 diabetes, it's normally between like 4 and 10, because we will naturally have a little bit of a rise in our blood sugar when we're eating something. But the way to check it is you can either use a little meter like this one, where you would put a little strip on the bottom and check by doing a little finger prick, and you put some blood at the end of a strip. Or, because technology is so advanced now, you have something called continuous glucose monitoring devices, or a little sensor. So you guys may have seen me wearing this one if you've watched my videos before. So that's a sensor called a Libra sensor, but there's different ones out there, where I would literally use my phone or a device like this one, which is a receiver, to be able to check my blood sugars. So I'd literally just do this, and then I could see what my blood sugars are. Again, I'll go into a lot more detail about all these different things in videos in the future. But yes, when you've got type 1 diabetes, there is literally no other forms of treatment. We can't take tablets in order to treat our condition, because if we were to take a tablet, it would just be destroyed by our stomach content. So the only way is to have an insulin pump which continuously delivers the insulin, or by injecting insulin. For someone without type 1 diabetes, you know, you would eat something that contains carbohydrates and your pancreas would do its magic. It would do what it's meant to. It would release some insulin. It would get all of the glucose that's being released from the carbohydrates that you're eating, and it would distribute them around your body, around your cells, and use them as energy. But because my pancreas has retired, doesn't work, what I have to do is I would have to, and obviously in someone without type 1 diabetes, like, you know, your blood glucose would stay within its normal range, okay? It would stay where it's meant to. Myself, before I eat anything that contains carbohydrates, I have to check my blood sugars. Now, obviously, with these sensors, they are amazing. However, technology can sometimes fail, which is why you would always resort to a more accurate finger prick test. But I would check my blood sugars using my sensor, and then once I've worked out what my blood sugars are and how many carbohydrates I am going to be eating, I would then have to do something called carbohydrate counting, which is where you have a balance of a certain ratio of insulin. So let's say my ratio was 1 unit of insulin for every 10 grams of carbs. If I was going to be eating 30 grams of carbs, I would give myself 3 units of insulin. So that's kind of how it works, but everybody will have different ratios and things like that. This is where it gets a little bit more complicated, but I'm just trying to give you an overview of what it's like. So check my blood sugars, work out how many carbohydrates I'm eating, try to inject the insulin 10 to 15 minutes before actually eating, because that's the time it takes for the insulin to start working in your body when you inject. And then I would eat, and then 2 hours after eating, because that's when the insulin kind of starts to run out, so it works for about 2 hours, the quick acting insulin. After 2 hours, I would then check my blood sugars again and see if I injected correctly. If I injected a lot, which would mean my blood sugars would drop drastically, or if I didn't inject enough, they would stay high. This is all very complex. It's kind of hard to know how much information to give you guys in these different videos, but hopefully it will all make sense. And any questions that you have, please do let me know in the comments below and I can answer them as well. But that is basically an overview of what type 1 diabetes is, and then hopefully in the next couple of sections or sessions, I will go into more depth and actually show you what it's like to give injections, you know, what to do when you're having a hypoglycemia, so a low blood sugar, or what to do when you're having a hyperglycemia, which is a high blood sugar. Thank you so much for watching. If you have type 1 diabetes and you're watching this, I would love to kind of connect with you, to know, you know, all my type 1 diabetes people out there, you know, because you're not alone. There's so many people out there living with type 1 diabetes, and it's always nice to connect with someone else who does know what you're going through. And yeah, if you're not living with type 1 diabetes but you do have some questions, or you know, this video didn't make sense, then please do let me know and I will try and answer any questions that you have. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, please subscribe for more, and I will see you guys very soon with another diabetes video. Bye.